Hello, everyone. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Michael Klein, CEO of Miraculo.
No, so you look at your local stores that are usually jammed at lunchtime, and instead, they've got two sad salads and two sandwiches and no customers. So it's kind of heartbreaking. Obviously, you're seeing a lot of businesses disappear,
Right.
and a lot of people have left New York.
Yeah, no, that's what I've been hearing. I mean, especially in LA, you've heard of a lot of people leaving, and surprisingly, they're coming. A lot of people are coming to Texas. We're having some new residents here, especially in the Austin area. So it's crazy, and I know that other people are just buying land and trying to move outside of the bigger cities. So it's an interesting shift that we're seeing right now.
Indeed. I saw a new product the other day. It's like a revolutionary RV that is completely sustainable. So battery operated. I think it's like $350,000, but you can basically park yourself anywhere, and this thing kind of folds out into this amazing house. It's really something if you want to go off the grid.
Right, yeah, and it's probably got all the bells and whistles, the Wi-Fi. You get your small bathroom, kitchen, all that kind of stuff.
100%, but really well done. It was really something.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and it's especially interesting for the cannabis industry, right? Lots of things have been happening. Before we dive into a lot of stuff, I do want our listeners to know who I'm talking with today. So Michael Klein is on. He's the CEO of Miraculo. Am I saying that correctly?
You are. Latin for miracle.
There we go. Okay, perfect. So basically, it's an integrated data and media company that addresses the needs of underserved audiences in the medical cannabis and CBD market. And the company has launched verticals, three of which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Michael, from the research I've done, you're known as the fixer within the corporate media world. So I want to hear a little bit about that background and how you made the transition into cannabis.
Sure. So my background is in entertainment and digital content. Prior to joining Miraculo as CEO 2 years ago, I was heading up original programming and content for MTV. And before that, Travel Channel, TLC, Sundance TV, so a number of different television networks. And then I went to Condé Nast, home of Vogue, Vanity Fair, GQ, etc., and was part of a team to launch a new division called Condé Nast Entertainment, which was taking the legendary publishing company and converting it to a media company by taking IP off the printed page to other screens, feature films, television, digital content. And there I built a digital network of some 20 channels, the Vogue channel, the GQ channel, etc., that we broadly distributed original short form content to audiences, and grew something that was very small, very, very small digital footprint to today does well over 1 billion video views a month. And so not only attracts large audiences, but also a great revenue driver for the company.
So was that during a time when, like, what year was that? Because it sounds like when you were creating this more snackable, consumable content, it was kind of when social media, we were seeing those trends within social media, right? People have 7 seconds to read a tweet. That's 140 characters, which it was at the time. Videos were only like 10 seconds. Vine was like 6 seconds. So was it during that time period or?
Yeah, so this was 2012 when we started. It was, YouTube was, obviously it was the rise of the influencers on YouTube. But, what we found the opportunity was there was a space for premium content for audiences. And so taking, the DNA of a Vanity Fair as an example, or even a Vogue, and bringing that to video, you could create some really premium experiences. You had incredible access given those brands, and you could go into worlds that people had not seen. And we were very specifically targeting millennials at that time, 18 to 34-year-olds, who had abandoned television, linear television, and certainly weren't in print magazine. They were living in digital environments, and we were able to create great experiences for them.
hmm Well, it's evident that you have a very, very impressive background, and hearing you explain just what you said, there's a clear tie between this data and the digital marketing experience, right? Or the the digital content that you've focused on within the corporate media space. Um,
Hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, that's what attracted me initially to the cannabis space. It was the cultural conversation that was going on, and for me, look, a hit television show or a hit piece of digital content means that you've discovered an underserved audience, and they reward you with viewership. And in cannabis, this cultural conversation was happening, and I felt there were some really clear lanes that weren't being addressed that we could take, build, and scale audience.
Yeah, and one of those challenges I would say is the oversaturation, right? Especially within the CBD market. I mean, the over marketing of CBD, it's kind of even hard to understand what exactly the medicinal properties are from that cannabinoid. Would you agree?
100%. Consumer confusion around CBD continues. And now, now you're seeing the introduction of CBG. It's like, well, we haven't quite got through CBD yet. And so there's work to be done there, and you're right, it is saturated. There are 3,000 CBD brands on the market today. But they're focusing on process or potency of their product, which consumers really don't understand. So you have to take a different approach in order to be successful.
Yeah, and let's dive right into that. So this is relevant for one of the verticals that you've launched, and that's Ask CMD, which I did take the quiz, by the way. So for those listening, Ask CMD is a product recommendation engine that utilizes artificial intelligence and machine learning to help curious CBD shoppers find lab tested, popular, and effective products to fit their specific needs. That's kind of the boilerplate standard, explanation. But we have Michael here. Michael, why don't you go ahead and explain what or Ask CMD is to you?
Sure. So, let me talk about sort of the need state that created it. Our other platform, Cannabis MD, which is a non-advocacy education site for potential benefits of medical cannabis and CBD. So what we found were curious consumers were coming in, particularly around CBD. We could see their journey of discovery and education to the point where they were ready to make a conversion, that they wanted to try a product, but they didn't know where. At that point, they had to go to out in the Wild West and sort of contend with a myriad of choices that are out there. So we thought, how can we leverage this power and authority that we have as a brand and apply it in a way that we could get the right products into consumers' hands? And that's where the idea of this quiz came up. I sat down with our digital director, Zach Holland, and said, what can we do? We have this knowledge base of audience. What can we do with it? And so we worked with our medical advisors, and we created that quiz that is asking general questions, it seems, around gender, form factor, understanding of product. But then we're also getting into, what are your tastes? Even that one question of, what brand do you have an affiliation with? All of that together, utilizing our AI and our machine learning that in this proprietary code that we have, then surfaces those products that fit your specific needs state. So I hope you found that when you did the quiz, when you looked at your recommendations that followed.
I did. Yeah, I did get the list, and it started with a P. I forget what the brand was, but it was a tincture. I know you have 7 partners, right? Do you have currently?
7 and growing. Yeah, that's Populum probably that you were served.
So basically, yeah. I mean, that's the same experience I had taking the quiz. I thought the answers were really great because it really speaks to what the consumer would be most interested in, right? Is it brand affinity? Is it potency? Is it for specific needs that they're wanting, whether it's chronic pain or anxiety alleviation, all that kind of stuff. So I thought that was great. And then on the flip side, I think it's also good. It's also a good kind of model for these up and coming CBD brands to look out for, right? When they're thinking about their digital marketing presence or their branding. It's important to kind of know, what are my objectives? What kind of audience do I want to draw in, right? So what have you seen in terms of trends on the digital marketing side, good or bad, within CBD specifically?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, I think one of the biggest issues we have are companies that are purely marketing on their product potency or their process.
Yeah.
So that, in and of itself, as I mentioned, causes the consumer confusion. But it doesn't ultimately address what consumers are looking for. CBD is an ingredient. It's not the product per se. I think if you're a pure oil, you're gonna have a hard time scaling today. And when you're talking to audience, and again, this is what I found so interesting about this industry. It wasn't one specific demographic that drove the rise of consumer interest in CBD or medical cannabis for that matter. It's a broad spectrum of consumers. My 20-year-old niece, who's a dancer, uses CBD as part of her recovery program, and my mother uses it on her knee that allows her to continue to golf. So
Right.
two very different consumers, very different need states. So you have to know who are you talking to and how you're talking to them and how you're talking to them on each platform. All of this from my experience, looking back at Condé Nast as an example, when you're creating original content for a Facebook audience, it's very different than it is for an Instagram audience, which is very different than it is for a YouTube audience. And so you have to be able to meet those consumers on those specific platforms. The parallels are there with CBD. It's for any number of different ailments or regimens, whether it be beauty, etc. So make sure that you're surfacing what makes your product so distinct outside of the fact that CBD is one component of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, those are all great points when it comes to the branding strategy and message positioning, in terms of how you want to be viewed within the industry, right? Or how your brand wants to be viewed. Taking that a step further, let's talk about the importance of actually having a solid digital marketing strategy, whether it be all the components of digital marketing, social media, website, email marketing, direct mail, all that type of stuff, right? Especially because we're waiting on the FDA's guidelines for sales and marketing of CBD. So it seems like the companies that are more prepared for when those guidelines are in place, the floodgates are going to be open at that point, right? So who do you envision being the real strong players versus the ones that'll be weeded out?
Well, I think those that really understand who their audience is. Right now, everybody is vying to be that brand that comes to mind for consumers. And there's a certain urgency to that. Certainly as from a capital markets perspective, it's been difficult, for a lot of these companies to raise capital because of that saturation. It's not that, I say this like it's easy. It's not that hard. It is challenging, but make good decisions. I find it maddening that, when I look at a brand, even outside of CBD, their campaigns, when they're talking to me, especially if I'm a customer of that brand, and I get a newsletter, but the newsletter is all about the fact that their women's clothing line is on sale. It's maddening to me. They know who I am. They know me. I purchase from them. They know where I live, yet they haven't taken the time within their teams to actually be very specific about each different channel they're talking to of customer. So it's really thinking about, and remember, a consumer's purchasing power is huge, but their decision process can be complex.
Right.
It's not just, and that's what I think Ask CMD does surface, that ask a few more questions. It's number one, a more engaging experience for the consumer. And there is a better outcome and a better chance of a conversion because you've listened to them.
Right. And I agree with what you're saying in terms of, like, it's maddening that you get those email marketing messages, or you get an email from a company that you've purchased with in the past, and they're asking you or they're recommending products that are so irrelevant, right? But I would even argue, myself being in the digital marketing space for 10 years now, that has not changed. In fact, I would argue it's maybe gotten worse with the duplicate emails you get, or the multiple emails you get per day that have nothing to do with what you're interested in or what you've done in the past. So I think in that regard, we've kind of taken a step back, and we've allowed this automation to kind of blur the lines of communication rather than being effective.
Well, as I joke with a company that I work with, like taking the artificial out of the intelligence. but be smart with how you're communicating to your consumer. Really figure out your tree, as it were, and make sure you have the right tools and process inside your company in order to achieve that. If you're using an off-the-shelf, whether it comes from your commerce platform or elsewhere, you probably need to customize that in order to have a better experience.
Right, right. Yeah. And so outside of digital marketing, based on your previous experience, like what else, like where do you see the future of artificial intelligence and big data playing a role within CBD, but even more broadly within like the whole spectrum of cannabis?
Well, look, in everything we're talking about here, we're contextualizing it as marketing. It's storytelling. Ultimately, it's storytelling. And what I find so interesting again about CBD and even in the medical cannabis space, putting adult consumption off to the side for a second, is it's a very emotional decision if you are turning to CBD, or even medical cannabis, because it generally, you are looking to solve a problem, an ailment that you have or a loved one has. And companies are also missing out on this. You see, sort of almost every CBD brand, it seems, has sort of green fields and sunshine-kissed mountains as for their marketing message. That's not what consumers are looking for. If it's anxiety, if it's sleep, how are you talking to them and getting your message across? So from a future perspective, as brands start to really embrace the consumer need states and are able to stand for something in the eyes of those consumers, and they learn more, where AI and machine learning comes into play is that you can not only create a better experience as consumers are looking for your product or service, but it becomes predictive. We'll see that if, well, this worked for my anxiety, can this work for my next thing? Whatever it might be. And that could be sleep, and those probably are not mutually exclusive, but are obviously two large categories right now, in particular during the pandemic. But even beyond that, as consumers become comfortable, they find products that are working, that CBD is an ingredient of, what's the next thing? And how can AI help be predictive to inform those pipelines and those form factors?
Mm-hmm. It seems like cannabis is in a really, really good position in terms of effectively leveraging AI technology, whereas it's been a little slower to adopt in other industries. For example, um, in my previous career, I worked for a large airline technology kind of provider, and they were always trying to crack the code of how can we personalize travel. You're driving to the airport, you get a notification, hey, your gate has been changed. Would you like a coffee before you board the plane? All that kind of stuff, right? And we're slowly getting there. I think the most progress we've seen is kind of within the personal devices that you see at home, like your Alexas or your Google, smart home devices. So, what do you think in terms of cannabis? Like, what does the industry need to do and focus on to be a pioneer in that space and leveraging this technology to inform consumers as to really what they're needing for their ailments?
Well, I mean, now are you talking about cannabis or CBD, or are you combining both of them? Because I think they're very different as well.
Well,
You
they're very different. I guess let's start with CBD and then we can talk about their differences.
Yeah, I mean, look, on the CBD side, outside of the clutter confusion that we talked about earlier, there's still some misconceptions about it. You also have a lot of bad actors that, my corner bodega sells CBD. It probably doesn't have any CBD in the bottle. Last year with Cannabis MD, we did a test. We blindly purchased 35 different products available on the market from a variety of sources, whether it be on the shelf in a store or online.
What type of
We
what
CBD product,
but like
different
it,
oils,
okay. So all
capsules.
okay.
Yeah, tested them. With our partner, Think 20 Labs, and our test was to actually confirm that what they said was in the bottle was true. And of those 35 brands, 16 we were able to say what they said in the bottle was true.
I believe it. I believe that for sure. Yeah.
So, and we know a little bit more than the average bear about this. So what does a consumer think of that? that suddenly this product, they've heard about this great product, and they buy it from their corner bodega, my poor bodega, but it does nothing for them. So that's a threat to the category, and that, like, part of that is the FDA. The FDA creating guidelines and a framework to make good companies successful,
Mm-hmm.
and to prevent this from happening, and to keep consumers safe. Some of the things we were finding in the bottle was horrifying. So that's one piece of it. But the consumer itself, and even on the cannabis side, you're still dealing with stigma. You still don't have great experiences. There's a lot of these, a lot of medically integrated cannabis companies that are out there. If you think about, in Florida and New York, where you're seed to sale. But that consumer experience still feels kind of ashamed. I have to ring the buzzer to go into this place, and then I've got to give my ID, and then I'm sort of parked over on the side, and I look at a menu. It's a horrible experience. And again, I think this is where technology can improve that dramatically.
So the experience you're explaining is seed to sale, meaning like walking into a dispensary, you feel that way, or buying like an actual seed from a provider, and then you being the farmer and planting it.
No, walking into a dispensary. What I'm talking about from state laws, where you have to, you grow your own to your selling and your prescriptions.
That's an interesting perspective. I haven't had that feeling. I mean, obviously, I've had my fair share of interactions in the black market, which is what you're explaining. Meet me in LA, or meet me over here. You don't even know what time they're going to show up because they're late. It's really strange and awkward. But the dispensary scene, especially in the states where it's legal, it's almost like an Apple, iStore experience to me. You walk in and everything's in a glass and very clean, and I haven't had that.
I totally agree. No, and there are some companies that we know that have done a tremendous job in terms of that experience, but there's still a long way to go. And if you are new to this, it can be scary for people.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's where, when we were talking about the issues and the challenges that the consumers are facing, not only with are the ingredients and everything actually in there with what they're saying, right? Are they committing to that? But then also the education, like we talked about earlier. What does CBD even do for you, right? Like, how can it help you? How can CBG help you? How is CBG different than CBN? So, and I see that that's a big focus in the verticals that you've launched, especially with what is it? The MD, the first one we mentioned, the Cannabis
MD. Mm-hmm.
Cannabis MD. So there's a lot of great content marketing in there, a lot of videos, a lot of blogs and whatnot. So that is a focus that I see that y'all are trying to push.
Yeah, and again, that was the first vertical we launched. That really came from my own personal experience. I didn't have a relationship with cannabis, other than my father a few years ago calling me and saying, I think I'm going to try medical marijuana, as he called it, for pain. He was dealing with a variety of health issues, and he lived in Canada. So, and at that time, before it was obviously legal recreationally, it's been medically legal in Canada for quite some time. So he went to his doctor and got a prescription, and then what? And it was that situation where he's going to a dispensary and he's relying on 22-year-old Jason behind the counter, who I'm sure is a nice guy.
Right.
But this is the person that is dispensing knowledge to my father. So as caregiver from afar, I did what I could, and it felt like early TripAdvisor, where you're finding all this array of content, but I have no idea if any of it is true. Does it have authority? Is it being written by Jason, who again is a nice kid, and so sure enough, my father ended up getting a morning vape and an evening vape, and he never slept better, and great. But so I really felt that always stuck with me. And I thought, okay, well, here's an opportunity. When we launched Cannabis MD, the medical community were so supportive, because we had taken our non-advocacy stance. The goal was to really cut through fake news. We don't have a bias towards use. It is really about here are the positive stories, here are the not so positive stories, with the goal to empower consumers to make choices that are right for them. Mm-hmm. So, we've been very fortunate, and we even, we have editorial rules around literally no smoke, no weed, no stigmatizing language on the site, because we want it to be a place for that curious consumer to come in, feel comfortable, and educate themselves, get smart.
I love that model, man. We need more of that, especially in today's journalism world. But that position of just being objective when you're approaching these topics, right? And it's so valuable to the end consumer because it could be anybody that's just interested, right? A grandparent that hears about how this could help them, or they hear it on the news, but they want to validate and find out more. So that approach is just spot on, and I wish more companies would take that stance.
But we are still, this is such a nascent industry, isn't it? It's funny we talk about CBD being so cluttered, but it is so new, and there's still so much research that needs to be done. Our knowledge is getting better and better. But I'll tell you, even across my council of medical advisors, wildly varying opinions on the application of CBD within a wellness program, and sort of what amount is required to actually have efficacy, and where does THC play into that, et cetera. And, in fact, they would say to me, like, are you okay with this, that we don't agree? I'm like, yes, that makes us that much more authentic to the audience, because we don't have all the answers.
And it makes you better, right? Because you're challenging the research, and you've got two objective people on two different sides that could eventually come to a conclusion that's really more close to what the answer is.
That's right.
I've had guests on previously that talk about the peer review studies that have been done and all the research that's been done around cannabis, right? Particularly government sanctioned or government issued reports. And, sadly, a lot of those reports only kind of showcase or bring about the negative effects that cannabis brings in. So they really, basically what I'm saying is they basically focused on all the negative when doing this research. So everything that was good and positive and the great medicinal properties that come out of the plant were not talked about. And the fact that we can't do human testing here in the US and in various countries abroad, there's only a few that are doing it. It's that's what's really slowed things down. But Cannabis MD is a great source to kind of get that knowledge, right, from an objective party. So
yeah, exactly right. And what you're talking about too, in terms of research and access for scientists, that's why the MORE Act, is being watched so closely. And the opportunity there, once you deschedule cannabis, that changes everything in terms of access for research, et cetera. I mean, there's still hills to climb, there's no question, but that, if the MORE Act does pass, that's I think you're going to see a significant shift.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that, when you say descheduled, that means that just basically moving it down to a Schedule 2, not removing it from the schedule list completely.
Well, no, the MORE Act, the intent is to remove it completely. So it's almost being treated like alcohol at that point. Biden's position, and again, we know it's not part of the Democrat platform right now, but he looks at rescheduling it. And there's a lot of groups against that, because you still suffer the same issues. It may be on a lower schedule, but it's still a scheduled drug.
Exactly. And that's what other guests have echoed. It's like, it will do nothing for the industry if it's just moved down to a Schedule 2, because the same regulations are in place. They're still very tight, in terms of what you can do and can't do and operate in that capacity.
That's right.
So,
well, and one of the biggest issues is the social injustice, and how taking it off schedule, you can start to expunge for minor violations that individuals have faced for years, and particularly for the Black and Latino communities, who were disproportionately impacted by these outdated laws.
100%. Amen to that. And no one should be in prison for cannabis. No one should be in jail for cannabis.
No, and this is not, by the way, this is not having a bias towards use at all. It's just the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do, especially because during COVID, these cannabis businesses have been deemed essential. So at this point, the times have changed, and these old legacy laws need to be overturned,
100%.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that on a state to state level, Illinois, Illinois is, they're not doing it's not, every state has a different rule, but I think what Illinois did when, when they legalized, they made it front and center that this was about righting the systemic wrongs in society.
Right. And I read an article actually, I think that you wrote, and it was talking about, how in early 2020, before obviously the pandemic and everything, New York was all about talking about all about, the legalization of marijuana. So what is, obviously things have changed, right? But where are they at? Is the discussion still being happening, or?
Yeah, I know it was a hot topic for 2020, and it felt like it was positive. There was a commitment from the governor that it would pass, and then COVID hit, and of course, New York early on, we were hit hard, as we know, and so it sort of lost. I think it lost a little bit of juice. So we'll see what happens. If it comes back. We're still trying to get kids back to school here, so it's. We got a little bit of time to go.
I totally understand that. And so not on the ballot though for November, like not up for vote.
No.
Okay.
No.
Got you. Yeah. I know that Arizona is another state that has it on their ballot for November. So if Arizona were to legalize for adult use, that could be huge for neighboring states like, New Mexico and Utah and others. So.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I do want to mention, I remember reading this interesting article when I was doing research before our recording today. There was an article that your business was featured in, and the title, it was a Forbes article from November 2019. And the headline was so captivating. It said, CBD is more popular than Jesus, Kanye West, the NBA, Taylor Swift, the Beatles, and the AOC right now. Data shows. And
yes.
And it's like, whoa, okay. And that was your company, right? That provided those intelligence reports, the data reports.
That's right. That was and bigger than Kim Kardashian online as well. And yeah, so that was from our product that we created called Knowledge Navigator on Cannabis MD. And what Knowledge Navigator did, one, it looks at emotional sentiment that consumers have around medical cannabis and CBD. And this is where I, really when I talk about the storytelling aspect of it and consumer need states, Knowledge Navigator surfaces that for us. So an example of sleep, for instance, when you look at where consumers are, why are they looking for sleep? What's that sentiment around CBD and sleep? What we do is we can track the consumer journey on Cannabis MD, but we take that data against our own data lake that we have with millions of points of data from social listening on social platforms, scanning news sites and other platforms. And with that, a picture will emerge of where the consumer is. So we can look at the demographic breakdown and, sort of where they're getting their information, generally what their careers are. But we can also then, we go down as far as you can get into what emojis are people using to express their sentiment around CBD and sleep, what hashtags they're using. And when you look at that emotional driver, the number one driver is fear.
Fear.
Now, most people would think it's joy.
Yeah.
That you want CBD and sleep, it's joy. It's fear. Because it's inside of that, you have a degree of anxiety, but it's fear of not getting enough sleep, fear of a sore back, fear of the impact it'll have on my health and wellness. That's the number one driver. So you see that, it's surprising. So we use that from an editorial perspective to create original content to address those need states. But you can see how powerful that can be for a CBD brand. I mean, I thought it was interesting last year when Casper Mattress, who had declared they want to be the Nike of sleep, and I'm a big Casper fan, but they came out with a CBD gummy, which, and I think they kind of bumbled their release, quite frankly. But, I thought it was interesting that they clearly had enough research to understand where consumers were in that respect as well.
Sure. No, I applaud that effort right there, because obviously, like we talked about, the market's saturated. I mean, I go into my dental office and they're selling CBD wellness products, right? But when you can correlate data and be a company that's in that particular space where the data is indicating, hey, there's a tie here, that's impressive, that they would do that.
Well, Ben, we use it across the board. We did a short film last year about Ethan Zahn. Ethan, who has been he won Survivor many years ago, was recently on the Survivor All Stars. He's fought cancer twice in his life, and he had never talked about the fact he used medical cannabis. But what we discovered in how we were telling the story, number one, and two, how we were positioning it to consumers, the more compelling story was that he used CBD for his anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So medical cannabis was used for his pain management, but CBD was managing his anxiety because he suffered enormous anxiety, fearful that the cancer would return, the impact it was having, etc. So the film is fantastic, done by an Emmy-nominated filmmaker that I've worked with in the past. And but the audience connection that we had with that, it went viral instantly because they had somebody who was talking about something that was clearly on the minds of consumers around anxiety.
Sure. Yeah. And then if you have a living testimonial, someone who actually can validate it, and tell their story, like you said, going back to storytelling, it's very important. It definitely changes people's minds. One thing that I've learned hosting this podcast and having scientists on and geneticists and people, one thing I didn't realize is that CBD acts as a counter property for THC. So if you're using recreational THC and you're very high and you want to kind of sober up and come down, take a CBD edible, and that helps you.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
It's crazy.
Listen, I have, my partner just went through shoulder surgery, and he was really, not interested in opioids to manage pain. And he worked with his doctor, and he's taking a high dose of CBD every day.
And that's, oh my God, so much better in terms of, of course, not getting physically addicted to the opioids, and that's just
the impact on your body, and terrible. Beyond everything else.
So hey, Michael, let's talk about God's Greenery now. So that's your most recent vertical that you've launched, correct?
Yes.
But tell us about that vertical and what your mission is for God's Greenery.
Sure. So God's Greenery really was born by the discovery of Christians who look at CBD, hemp-derived CBD, as part of their wellness routine. And we found there was a growing community online, but there was no one place where they could come together, be educated, share stories, and have it through a faith lens. So we launched the platform initially as that community and for that discovery. And through 2019, as I met with a number of Christians of influence, as I like to call them, I don't like the word influencer, and other people, members of the community, their follow-up question to me was always, well, what do I buy? What do I buy? Because they would have this great experience with CBD, generally very emotional.
Right.
A woman in Dallas discovered it. Her husband had served 3 terms in Iraq, came back, PTSD. CBD was the only thing that would unlock him. Another person in Nashville had a grandson who was bit by a mosquito and had a horrible reaction. And she put it out on her social media. Somebody suggested CBD. She tried it, a CBD cream. She tried it and it worked.
Wow.
So, and that's social currency for anybody. It's like you've discovered something and it works. You want to tell people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the follow-up question was, what do I buy? What do I buy? And my response was, we're non-advocacy. We don't have a position on products, etc. But I brought it back to the team and talked, and I said, is there an opportunity here to reward this community by formulating our own products that combine CBD with other healing plants and herbs? So we got to work, and over the last year have been working on these formulations that are very specific. And just 4 weeks ago, we launched the God's Greenery line of products.
Wow. And it's all based off of the feedback and talking to these potential or future consumers, right? And you just kind of aggregated that data and said, here's what we need. Here's what we need to do. That's
right. And for an audience nobody was talking to. When we launched God's Greenery, you would have to think there would be some sort of pushback from the Christian community around the notion of cannabis, or even though this is only, hemp-derived CBD, we got none of it.
No,
None of it.
none of it.
In fact, it was more about, oh yeah, I love CBD. We just never had a place to talk about it. So that was embraced. We actually had more pushback from Cannabis MD than we ever did from God's Greenery. Funny enough.
I know that within the website of God's Greenery, there's like a section for ambassador program. So what does that mean? Is that like where they can sell their products, sell the products and make some type of commission, or just kind of spreading the word about the product, or what is that?
That's right. Yeah, we sell through a direct sales channel. So the products are available at godsgreenery.com, or you sign up as an ambassador. You receive a discount for life of 20% off products, but you get your own referral code, and you share that with your communities, and you will get a referral bonus that increases depending on sales. The other piece is that we tied a portion of our revenue to local churches and not-for-profits that individuals can choose. So it's a great way to earn extra income at home, but it's also a great way to give back with, every purchase, a percentage going back to these charities.
That's great. I mean, what human being doesn't like community, right? And so it seems like what you're building with God's Greenery is just that, a community of like-minded people who are interested in learning more about CBD and how it can help.
That's right. And again, in these products, again, I don't even like calling it CBD line. They're a wellness line. CBD is one ingredient. The efficacy of the products comes from the combination of the other natural ingredients that we put together. And we worked with this incredible formulation team led by Dr. Jason Mitchell, who powers the intelligence in the bottle, as we say. And we really got something special with it.
That's really great, Michael. One thing I do have to touch on, I know that we've talked about a lot here, and you're a busy man, but I want to circle back from what we were first talking about and how you're the fixer, and known as the fixer within the corporate media space. And one thing that you didn't mention that I think that the audience would be interested in hearing is that while at MTV, you were brought on as the EVP, like with one purpose, and that was to bring back music videos and bring MTV back to the glory days, right?
Well, it wasn't music videos per se, it was music.
Music.
Which seems incredibly obvious when you're MTV, but it wasn't.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many people, and even including myself, where we would say like MTV, it doesn't even do music anymore. It's all these reality shows, and whatnot. And so, what was that process like? Was it pretty challenging at first, or were the executive team pretty receptive to those ideas?
Well, I was really fortunate. I was part of an entirely new executive team that was brought in to do exactly that, bring music back to the brand. Where for me, it was an opportunity to speak to these audiences cross-platform. And that was critically important. And these legacy networks, and even legacy publishing companies, they turned their back on digital in the early days. And it's a hard road to catch up. And because of the experience that I had with Condé Nast, MTV was a natural that you could, knew that there were these audiences across these other platforms, knowing that linear television can play an important role if you get it right, and an opportunity, a platform for artists to come and share their work. So it was a lot of fun. MTV was an important part of my life growing up. It was a real honor to be there, as a grown up, as it were. And playing in that space and working with some amazing people.
I bet. Yeah, no, that's so cool, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with before we sign off today?
Number one, you have a really cool job. I love the fact that you can reach out and speak to people from across this industry. Clearly you have a passion for it, and the fact that you get to pick people's brains. So I applaud you for that, by the way. Look, I think what we said early on, it's important that this industry come together, help support each other, and it's important that companies be very aware of their audience. I've seen so many investor presentations from other companies, when they're talking, and they think that they're talking to everybody. If you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody.
Right.
And I think that is going to be a critical piece as you kind of move into the next phase of this industry, that you really understand who your audience is. And there's some great tools and products available out there to help you do that. It's a wise and smart investment. And I think there's a real urgency for companies to get on board with that in order to survive.
Well, those are very wise words from a very smart man. Michael Klein, aka the Fixer. I really appreciate your time today, man. Really, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Nice conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.